All right. Hello and welcome from all over the world. Welcome to this session here on leading in times of COVID-19. And especially there, the first part of this one, how to build and lead in an engaging remote organization. My name is Lars Südmann. I will guide you through this whole series of the three sessions, but especially also here for today during this session. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are located. Just some quick things, how to make the most of the podcast, participate in some of the polls. You can afterwards download the presentation, view it in full screen if you want, and share it, of course, afterwards as well. Now, you can earn credits here while doing this one. It's a full hour session. It's continuous professional education, but also HAI, SHRM, HRCI credits. You can earn that. You will see later on how you can request these credits. You will see that at the bottom of the screen. Who am I? I will share some thoughts later, but I am an advisor on global leadership. I've worked in various roles in organizations and so on, and I'm a council director with the conference board. And with these two hats, I want to share with you today some ideas, strategies, and thoughts on global leadership, how to lead and work in a global organization. So how to build and lead an engaging remote organization, that is our topic here for today. Now, before we dive into this one, what I would love to hear from you, I would love to open a little poll, and you should see a little poll. I would love to see, because we have lots of participants at the moment and you should see a little poll appearing there. That is from where you are calling in. And if you can briefly click on and submit the results and just see, so that we can see a bit like from which continent, so to speak, you're calling in at the moment. Also to see if I should continue to say good morning, good afternoon, and so on. So the results are coming in. Okay. Fantastic. I can share with you the results in a second. So that's what we have here. We have the vast majority from North America calling in and a couple of folks from Europe as well. So vast majority, good morning to you all and good afternoon. Great. Let us continue. How to build and lead an engaging remote organization. Now, I've been speaking and working on remote organizations now for about 10 years. I've led a couple of remote transitions, large remote projects, and I've been speaking about this a lot to corporate audiences, to audiences similar to you. And in the past, I used to have this slide here. Why should we care about the remote environment? Why should we care at all? And then I used to bring in some other slides and some ideas on why this is really important or why some great organizations are moving to the remote environment. Well, the whole situation of COVID-19, so to speak, has changed that why we should care about a remote organizations quite significantly as well. As many of you most likely will experience at the moment, there has been a vast and fast change when it comes to remote work. There's this famous internet meme going on. Who drove the digital transformation in your company? Was the CEO, was the CIO, or was it COVID-19? Well, very often the answer to this one at the moment is COVID-19. People go like, well, that really changed a lot here. That really changed it. So what we've seen here over the past weeks was really a change for some organizations from no remote work, where people said, like, why should we have any remote work, to maybe some hybrid setups that lots of global corporates, of course, use. Some people call in from different offices. Sometimes it's work from home, to a full remote setup, to a full remote organization. And before we dive into this, what that means as well, I would love to understand as well one question from you, and that is the following. How remote was your work prior to this? Just a second. I will reopen here a poll. How remote was your work? Just one second. Okay, I'll give you a couple of ideas, a couple of thoughts here. How remote was your work? Was it like 0%? Okay, nothing. I was always sitting together with my colleagues. 1 to 19, up to 100%, and so on. Just give it a brief thought so that we can see what you guys in the audience, basically, how the setup was before COVID-19. And the results are coming in. It's interesting to see. Okay, I will, while you're still click. Okay, I will end this here. I will show you the results. So the vast majority of you, 1/3 at 1 to 19%, the other one 20 to 40%, and so on. That is the vast majority. Some of you 100% always remote working, and some of you never. So we have a vast and broad audience here, but especially some of you had this kind of like hybrid work. Some of the work was remote, some of it was not. And of course, now we've seen this massive shift now moving forward. And one of the things that we want to explore now is like, what has that done and how do we engage and how do we deal with that one now? Now, I want to share with you ideas and tools and strategies here today from 4 different angles. I'm a global leadership lecturer, so I've been researching high-performance virtual and remote organizations, but especially global organizations as well over the past decade. Organizational advisor, also with the conference board here, for example, as well, trying to see what does good global leadership look like. But I've led various remote teams. I've led face-to-face teams, like co-located teams, basically, and very dispersed organization. And also we looked at the transition between these. And from that perspective, I will share also a couple of tools, a couple of ideas. But also there's always a 4th angle. I have also been on the receiving end of virtual leadership. I had one of my management, I had my team, my organization with me, but then also my management on the same floor. So we worked up to moving from where I was based in Europe. Then all of a sudden, my boss was in the US then. So also that side I received as well, and I went through. And from these 4 angles, I want to share with you some strategies, tools, and ideas here today. All of this, by the way, also based on a book that we've written here, Innovation That Sticks, for Innovative Leadership Strategies. Now, what is the good news? Before we dive in, the good news is there was an MIT study done and published 2009 where they looked at co-located teams versus virtual teams. And they started to look at how can co-located teams, do they always outperform virtual teams, or can virtual teams outperform them? And the finding that they had was like virtual teams can outperform co-located teams. But, and that was a big caveat that they put in there, they said like, but only if the right strategies and practices are in place. And I think that is what a lot of you who are probably now, working 100% remotely really experience. It doesn't go automatically, so to speak, that a virtual team and a remote team can work well. Because if we go back, how does it feel to work like this? How does it feel to work like this, to work in a remote setting? And for this one, I will ask you now again, one question here. Apart from the crisis, so to speak, how do you like remote work? I'll just give you 3 answers here. Apart from the crisis, how do you like remote work? And the results are coming in. Also here, interesting to see. Okay. I will end the poll and I will show you the results. Well, what do we see? Like vast majority, 2/3 almost of you say, good, you like it. And actually, that is interesting. Now, of course, we have now various things. The whole situation at the moment, COVID-19 is changing a lot, of course, on how we act and operate, and we need to separate the thing. But what is interesting, what I do see at the moment, is that lots of people actually say, no, it's quite okay. Actually, how we work now in this environment, again, apart from the crisis, apart from the business situation, but how we work actually is not so bad. I like it. Lots of people did this already before. But of course, there's also some of you say, nah, neutral, and some of you say, no, don't like it at all. Well, why is that? Because some people say, no, it's really great. I can connect. Everybody is there. Everybody is connected. And that is actually what we're seeing, and I will come to it back in the end now. What we're seeing now is a very unique situation because we are almost pushed within a matter of weeks into a full virtual scenario. And what we've seen already in the past, full virtual works also quite well. And that's why maybe also a lot of you experience this now, that it's working quite okay. What maybe the ones who don't like it, or everybody who works virtually has already experienced in the past, is also that sometimes remote work is a little bit like this, Or you get off the phone call or the Zoom or the Skype or whatever it is you're using, and again, there has been a misunderstanding and you wanted to really maybe have this face-to-face interaction back. In fact, there was one study that says, especially in the beginning, 90% of virtual team members complain. They say, like, well, it's very difficult to build relationships and trust, especially with people you've never met before, where the face-to-face tank is not that high. Now, let's see what we can do about this, because like very often remote work works as a roller coaster, and lots of us are experiencing this now as a very fast roller coaster. If on this y-axis you can see the engagement or how well you like it, a lot of team members go through like different phases, again, apart from the crisis situation, of course. In the beginning, they say, like, hey, this will work, that's great. But sometimes then people have this feeling, wow, where is everybody actually? I don't know where people are, and I want to talk to them. And then sometimes go like, I'm not part of the team anymore. Somehow it's sometimes different. But then lots of teams go through the phase and say, now we know how to do this. Now we know how to connect better. And then some, and I would say the best teams I've worked with, the best organizations, then they say, okay, now we've learned to master this. But some also, if they don't put some strategies and best practices in place, then really go like, no, we don't get used to it. Let's go back as fast as possible. What I want to do now today is to share with you a couple of strategies for your toolbox, so to speak. This year, what you see there, that box should represent your toolbox for your virtual leadership. And when it comes to virtual and remote organizations, my credo is it's about tools, not rules. It's not about saying like there's this one approach. It's about testing, finding out, and finding which tools work for you as a leader or as a remote worker, for your team and for your organization. So what I want to do is guide you through 10 tools and strategies that I've seen great high-performance organizations do, with hopefully some ideas and strategies that you can apply the next day. So let's go through them. If you have, by the way, any questions, also afterwards, send me an email, send me a tweet, whatever it is, let's connect and let's continue that conversation around virtual environments and remote organizations. So 10 tools I want to share with you. Tool number one, and probably the most important one, that's why it's also on number one. The tool number one is have proactive interaction. Proactive interaction. Why is proactive interaction so necessary? Because it doesn't come always natural to humans. What comes natural is to be at the water cooler, at the coffee machine, whatever it is that you are, and have that conversation and say like, hey, have you seen that report yet? Did you know what it was about? Yeah, I think it was about this and this. Oh, great, thanks for the perspective, great. Now, the water cooler that we have, most of us at the moment now, looks like this. And maybe there's other people also around there, but it's probably and most likely not a lot of colleagues that are there, not a lot of other people that you can connect with. And then these connections don't happen spontaneously anymore, and we have to connect differently with others. Now, what is one of the key things that I recommend leaders to do is to have daily interactions, not maybe with everybody, but to really see how often am I reaching out? How often am I checking in with others? Because it does not happen spontaneously anymore. It also doesn't happen randomly anymore while you walk through the office or while you see somebody, and we'll get to that. But you have to do it proactively. You maybe see somebody in your email chain, but maybe some others you won't see. And that's why one of the key metrics is to have daily interactions. But maybe even to continue something. In a headquarters situation, very often people go, hey, let's have a quick coffee, let's have a discussion, let's have a 15-minute chat. These are very important and powerful. And what I've seen great virtual organizations do is really also, and great virtual leaders do, is also maybe even organize virtual coffee connects and so on. Really exchanges, thought exchanges, but they have to be proactive. And what I've always done in my virtual roles is really in my calendar, almost pointed out for every day, who should I connect to today? Not to micromanage, not to follow up on, not to say like, hey, are you working already? Good morning. But to be connected and to continue to be connected, because that does not happen naturally. Number two, strategy number two for you, reflect on your virtual image. Reflect on your virtual image. Why is the virtual image important? Now, let's look at the typical situation, maybe that you see at the moment, maybe you know somebody who sees it at the moment. And there goes like, okay, what does the workday look like? All right, let me send this email. Now I have the phone call with the team and with this team member. Okay, great. Now I just update the microblog of the company. Some of you might have these kind of things, like where you update in your team file or wherever, like an update for the organization. And then, of course, a video conference with the team. That was it. All right, work went well today from my home office. Okay, I can go back. Now, all of you know it's not that simple, and it's not only these four things that are done at the moment, but let's look at them. Let's look at them quickly. And why is it important that we look at one thing, which is your virtual image? Now, let's look at the other side of what could have been perceived in that as well. So, for example, that email. Maybe that person then who has received this email says like, well, there was just do that as an email text and just a one-liner lined with L and not even the full name. How rude is that? And that person is maybe sitting in the office very frustratedly, but you don't see it. Or maybe that phone call. Have you ever been on a phone conference where you heard the sound in the background? Yeah, where that person is on the phone and you can really, either see them in a video call, but if you remember the phone conference, you hear like, you hear it, and you hear it on the background where you go like, yeah, oh yeah, great point. Well, that's fantastic. And you can really see, some people really think like, wow, that is such a great person. That person is really good at multitasking and so on. But most of the time, that's not the reaction. Most of the time, it says like, wow, he or she was typing all the time, does not care, does not really engage. Or with these microblogs and so on that we see in a lot of organization at the moment, it's like, well, what's that update? And people start talking about this. And of course, the one thing that we're learning all in the past 4 weeks, like the backgrounds and pictures and people walking in and so on. Did you see the funny background, or did you see that background there? All of this now, what we know is that this is contributing to what is called our virtual image. And people who have worked in virtual teams, some of you were there 100%, know that before. It might be a different reflection, a different image than the face-to-face image. If you've ever met somebody for the first time while we were still meeting people, for the first time after only having email and phone and WebEx interactions and so on with that person, and you really thought, that individual is really different than I imagine him or her to be, then you've seen the virtual image at place. And I think it's a key thing to keep that in mind. And what I've seen great teams and great virtual organizations to do is really to have, probably if our leader here knew what the people were discussing and thinking about this, probably would have not the thinking of great day was there. But what do great teams do? They use tools like the Johari-Window for a virtual image check. What we've done in virtual organizations, really see, are there any things that we should be aware of in our virtual interaction? And as many of you and many organizations have been forced from 30, 40% virtual to 100% almost now in the last time, it might be now a good step to really do checks in your teams with tools like this, your Johari-Window and virtual interaction. And go like, what we go in there is like, what is known to others and what is not known to others? And what is known to yourself and what is not known to yourself? What is known to others and known to myself? Well, is at the moment, what color is my suit and so on there. What is not known to others but known to myself is what I had for lunch earlier today. But what is really interesting, of course, in teams and an organization in general, but especially now with new tools and technologies that people need to start to explore, is what might not be known to myself but known to others. From an email tone to a funny picture or whatever it is, but these are, of course, the blind spots. And what I've seen great virtual organizations do is to share every 2-3 months, like do quick rounds, like, is there anything that I should be aware of in my remote interaction with you across all of these channels? That can be a very powerful, quick exercise that as a leader you can initiate and do. Tool number 3. Overshare with your team. Overshare with your team. What do I mean by overshare? Share how you will communicate with each other. So not only sharing information. Some of us might be thinking like, well, there's information overload. But what I definitely can recommend you is to share how you will communicate with each other. Because they're similar, building on our last point, in a remote organizations, there are new ways of interacting. So in these new ways of interacting, lots of people, and especially if it's a new global organization, lots of people have different interpretations. So let's take, for example, email responses. Maybe you were co-located before, maybe you can talk, but now lots of communication goes, of course, via Zoom, via Adobe Connect, or email, all of these other channels. Now maybe it's a good time to really align on expectations around this. Because, for instance, when it comes to email, all of us know there's different types of individuals, so to speak, who interact also differently. There's some people, the extremes that I've seen was once a CEO of a big accounting firm, and he said, like, 7 days out of 7, I reply to an email within 10 minutes. That was expectation number 1. And there's other people that we all know, when it comes to email, they say like, an email, I treat a little bit as optional, so to speak. The problem is if these people are sitting close to each other, that could still be managed. But in a remote setting, that can be a recipe for disaster. What do I recommend to do is to establish every remote organization, every remote team, so every team leader, be that from the CEO down, but everybody with a direct interaction team, establish a team communication chart. It's a very quick virtual team building exercise that can be enormously nice and powerful. What does that look like? Simple chart, which look like this. Simple chart. What does it have on it? It has on it the name, of course, like the different names, like, okay, Marie, Albert, whatever it is. And then what is the preferred channel? What is your preferred interaction channel, basically? Now that we are fully remote, how can I preferably reach you? Now, what does it mean preferred? Well, for some people, that's email. For others, that might be a short message or in WhatsApp or whatever it is. For others, it might be a quick call with a phone call, still a good old phone call, whatever it is. But let people list it down. And then what's your 911 call? What's your emergency call? In case of an emergency, and lots of us are experiencing, of course, a lot of them at the moment, how can I best reach you? How can I best reach you? And for some, again, that's email. For others, for me, it used to always be texting, a text message, basically. So then I know that is really, really urgent for my teams. But my teams, I still remember that time ago, they said like, also when I was on vacation on a while, they said like, why haven't you answered? You have this mobile device and so on. I was like, well, I was on vacation. Well, but we've sent you an email. It's like, well, and that was for me a moment to establish that communication matrix. But it's also things like, how should we go about feedback and so on? What is the best way we can give and share feedback, basically? How should we deal and leverage with conflict if you want to do that? And then, I mean, these two are optional, the feedback and conflict, but especially the one, what is your no-no? What is your absolute no-go in terms of communications? Is that never replying? Is that over-promising and so on? And this can be done perfectly also in a Zoom call, as we will see in a second, or on the WebEx, Teams, or whatever it is you're using. And it can be very powerful to elicit these ideas and thoughts from your team members. And when you have this up, then as a team leader, as the organizational leader, you of course define then what does it mean on top? What does it mean? What is our response time? Now that really depends on your organization, of course. Some are crisis, and a lot of them are crisis mode at the moment. You can't say like, oh yeah, we respond to that in the next week and so on. No, I mean, we live in unprecedented times. But maybe it's different. Maybe you can find some upper and lower boundary. Maybe you can say like, look, I mean, also in this time, let us all commit, if possible, that we answer between 24 and 48 hours, if that works for your team. And if you set these upper and lower boundaries, you really avoid these type of things that some people go, they send an email, and if after 5 minutes they haven't got a response, they open up a chat box and say like, hello, haven't you received my email? Hello, haven't you received my email? And so on. That's on the one hand, but also that you can avoid that and can really follow up also with the people who say like, look, I mean, there's a lot of no responses and no reply here. So Team Matrix can be a very powerful, very simple tool that I think every high-performance virtual organization has established for themselves, for their organization. Then, number 4, use the ladder. And the latter comes, and the latter is a key thing. Now, again, fully remote, as most of us are fully remote. It is a question like, how do we deal, especially when it comes like towards conflicts? And before, what we could do in a co-located environment, you go to a meeting room and you say, okay, let's discuss that. If that is not possible anymore, if there's a 100% virtual organization, that looks a little bit different. And then people start to send around emails and so on, and rely a lot on emails. But what I've liked about this quick study here by Nicholas Apley on the University of Chicago, he said, relying on email and understanding the tone and message of an email, really like what do they meant, especially if it gets a bit conflict related, that one we shouldn't do. As you've sent it here, like people are not really good at understanding the tone and message of an email. And what then very often happens is that people over-assume and really say like, there are some problems, and fire back and say, like, what is this unacceptable message? Like, take that, bam, bam, bam. And then this email ping pong comes like, what is this unacceptable? No, no. Especially in times of crisis now. What should we do? Well, facts are friendly, never assume. I think these are the most powerful mottos of high-performance virtual teams. Facts are friendly, never assume. And if you feel to assume, use the ladder. What do I mean by the ladder? The ladder is a very simple concept that says like, look, I mean, depending on your stage of communication, especially starting with low context to email up to the highest context that we can have at the moment, which is video, try as soon as you feel you're not being correctly understood, try to move up the ladder in terms of context. So for an email, maybe to phone call, or maybe to instant messaging, from instant messaging to phone call, from phone call to video call. Move up the ladder as soon as you feel like, well, there's somebody doesn't really understand it here correctly. And that is a very powerful concept. So instead of saying like, okay, I reply to all, I reply this, really like, okay, let's have a quick chat just to clarify this and this. And the good signal for me was always like when you have this feeling of like, wow, what do they mean with this? If this comes up, it's a good moment to step up with a ladder and to go to the next phase. And then we come to a more deeper one, so to speak, which is virtual performance management. Now, depending on, some of you were 100% before, lots of you were not so much virtual and were not so virtual working there before. And for this, we really need to understand now, how do teams, leaders interact with virtual teams? Now, luckily, there's been already quite some studies around this. But let's go around again to a typical day in a typical life, so to speak, of a worker, of a remote team leader somewhere. So that is a person who leads also on the group. And as we all virtual right now, or many of us are virtual right now, that maybe you know somebody who went through a situation like this. So, wow, what a week. So it's Friday for that person. The full rework of the model is done. Great, okay, finally. All right. And then here it is. Then also developed the training program for all employees. Did that. That was a lot of work here from home. Then the coordination, execution of the virtual meeting. Everybody was calling in from home. We opened up the chats and but that was difficult because people were arguing and I had to moderate, and it was really emotionally very, very tense. Not to mention the remote team building event and so on that I organized. That was also big. Wow. Now the last thing for the week is the call with my boss. Okay, so, and then maybe the boss goes out like, wow, and says and starts, all right, well, good to check in. Wow, it's busy here. I didn't hear from you all week. I haven't heard anything. I wish I also had such a calm job in this time. And maybe again, you know somebody who has been in a similar situation. Maybe not. Maybe this never happens to you. But the key thing is here, these things happen. And why is that? That is one of the key things, one of the key elements why people don't like that much remote work. Because they don't feel very often that their work is being adequately addressed and adequately seen, and seen correctly. And as leaders, we need to be aware of these type of things, but also we need to train our organizations to be aware of these factors, because all of a sudden, of course, in remote work, we don't see a lot of the signs anymore that will happen, especially if you're a lot co-located. And one of the things, again, the reaction from our friend here would probably be like, I did so much and you haven't seen that. What kind of reaction is that? So why is that important? Yeah, we did. I used to work for Procter & Gamble as well, and when we did a study there on remote success programs, basically, and really saw it, I really liked what one associate director here for human resources said here. He said, deliver some work you do are harder to see from distance, right? People, you need to be more agile, and you need to check in. You can't expect to check in with the manager at the same frequency, so you have to really adapt your way of interaction there. And as leaders, we have to train and work with the organizations, and everybody in the organization need to be aware of that. What is the one thing that whenever I work with leadership groups on really like high performance global leadership, high performance virtual leadership, we look at one thing which is called the passive face-time bias. Now that's quite a word, passive face-time bias, but it came out of the University of Florida from Professor Eisenhardt there, a long study on again, effectiveness of virtual leadership. What she found out is that especially the passive face-time bias is important when people evaluate, when leaders evaluate others, leaders and managers evaluate others. So what is the passive face-time bias? Well, active face-time is you're seeing actively my video at the moment. So in a video one-on-one, or even in a Zoom video where you see everybody, that's active FaceTime. In an office environment where you see somebody and have a meeting, that's active FaceTime. That works quite well actually in terms of be it face-to-face or virtual. If you have a one-on-one video conference or another one, that works quite well actually. People assess people relatively similarly. But what is lacking in a remote environment is what is called passive FaceTime. Passive FaceTime is that whole thing, we all remember, you sit in an office somewhere and you see the people walking in, or you see your team members negotiating with that supplier in the glass meeting room, and you see them discussing there. And you think like, wow, they're really working. Yeah, that's quite interesting. Or you see like another person leaving or coming late and so on. You wonder like, what was happening here and so on. All of these are passive FaceTime things. They can be positive and negative, but they happen. What is in a remote environment not happening is that passive FaceTime interaction and this passive FaceTime view. And what great remote organizations do is really look at what are called compensate passive FaceTime strategies. What I recommend every remote organization to look at are key areas to overcome this lack of passive FaceTime, and to really make it available and make it clear and conscious on what's going on, especially in terms of these 4 areas here: frequency and timing of communication. So really align, as we talked before, how often do we communicate basically with each other? Not just what I call the burst and silence, or more regularly. What is our availability? The number one thing that every remote manager has sometimes seen, like you work with somebody and then you send the person a note, maybe via chat or WhatsApp or whatever it is, like, hey, have you looked at this and this? And then it's working hours and then you don't receive a reply for some time. You think that, what's going on there? That is availability and responsiveness. That is also a key thing that everybody in a remote organization, leaders, but every member needs to be aware of. So aligning this and agreeing this one, like, okay, what are some availability times, as we talked there before? What type of content do we share? Do we agree that we regularly share the work to avoid this kind of like, hey, what have you been up to? And also when we meet again face to face, so to speak, also in the future, and that's more in the future as well, when you keep the remote strategies and so on, also see like if you go back to meeting face to face, what is actually the context and so on that we see there. And what especially in these fields here, I recommend to really reflect a lot about and think about, for example, do I want to have a constant flow of updates? Or rather to have a burst in silence? And I would definitely recommend to have that constant flow of updates and not to have this feeling like, well, this person, Frank, I haven't heard from him the whole week. That's what we talked there before. This is what should definitely be avoided, because it is in human nature as face-to-face beings. But actually by implementing, making them conscious and actually focusing on some of these, agreeing on some of these strategies, hey, let's rather have some updates in chunks so that we agree and connect, is some of the powerful strategies to have. All right, so fundamentally here, it is, okay, so fundamentally what I recommend is to have what I call a results-only leadership style. Results-only leadership style, that's really what goes into. So clearly specify results you want to have done by you and your team beforehand, and then agreeing these frameworks around this is one of the most powerful and one of the most clear things and so on that I would recommend all to have. One of the key things. So results-only leadership style. Clearly specify the results you want to have done by you and your team, and then building up on these additional engagement elements. So there we go. These were the first 5 strategies that I wanted to share with you. Proactive interaction, reflect on the virtual image, overshare, and especially overshare the way you want to work on. Use the ladder when it comes to emotional, especially when it comes to things where you think like, have they understood me? What do they mean by that? And so on. And then especially that performance and exposure element. All right, before moving forward, the next 5 will also be very practical tips on what I've seen great remote organizations do when it comes to interacting with each other. And what I would love to do here is actually a quick check on you for your remote meetings, how your remote meetings actually are. And we're just to see, because the remote meetings is one of the key things how remote organizations, remote teams actually interact. I would love to briefly see how you would, all of us here, 80 people on the call, actually see this. And I've just given five options here. Okay, results are coming in. Let's wait briefly. Okay. All right. So let's look at it, what we have. All right. So 10%, they're great remote meetings. Okay, fantastic. We need to have a chat afterwards as well. Like what are some of the best practices, but also good. Large chunk, so 40, and then not so good. Nobody terrible, which is good. Actually, these are good news, and we'll come again to this one on what at least one of my hypotheses on why that is. Because whenever I've done this in the past 10 years, the same poll, actually the results on average were much worse than this. Much worse. And I think we have changed it here now. And we'll come back to later on why that is. But you see, like, still, like, for this, like, so, and so on. And I think what I've seen great remote teams do, great leadership teams do, is really spend a lot of time on seeing how can they best do remote engagement. So what are some of the strategies here? Well, one of the strategies, certainly not to have the good old slides and so on that we have, just present them over there, and just keep on reading. So here are the results for Belgium. So June is 23, and so on and so on. Or to just have a flow, as we can see, of like one after the other of the what we call bullet point monsters, where people, what they do is they start reading, and then they continue what they have ever done, basically there, and leave, so to speak, on. And that's what we then sometimes see. That's what we used to see in the past, when people actually leave or go back to their emails. In the past, even before the COVID, I once had a conversation on this one, and one person actually also answered there, great. I was like, well, what? Yeah, online meetings, I love them. Oh, it was a Canadian colleague of mine. I was like, what, really? Yeah, I can get my work done during online meetings. But that was pre-COVID. That was before a lot of things. Now let's see how many organizations have done. And I want to share with you very, very quickly a couple of more strategies on what actually great remote organizations do here. So number one is visualize everything one does. Lots of you, I mean, we've seen the boom of Zoom, so to speak, in there, but lots of you might use also Adobe Connect, Skype, Teams, whatever it is. But the number one rule is visualize everything. So moving from phone conference, not necessarily always to video conference where everybody's video. Zoom is great in this. And it's good to have that connect. We like it. But also, especially if you discuss deep work things, to really also go in and visualize the slides, visualize the different areas. But also, for example, start sharing your Excel topic, your Excel sheet. What you can do in Adobe Connect and most tools, all of you will be using different tools. But what you can do is, for example, also not only share the screen, that works, but also sometimes just share specific programs. And instead of just talking, why not create the thing together while everybody looks at it? The meeting topics or the minutes or whatever it is. Really always going back and seeing, okay, typing in what is working, what is not working, and so on. And then continuing with this one. With that, something is constantly happening. People also need to read, like, okay, is this here correctly reflected or not? People need to continue to read on this one. And that is a very, very powerful thing. So visualize everything, great slides together with voice, but especially open up your documents, the Word document that somebody's working on, switching with different screens, calling in with a second laptop, for example, into a remote meeting if that works. And then have one person, or yourself as well, maybe as well share one thing from another and then move back again. But really playing with this one. So not only phone, not only video, not only a PowerPoint after PowerPoint, but really using that as a co-creation space, basically. Then what we can do. Number 7, learn from TV presenters. Now, this is a very practical thing, and especially now since we use more and more video. I think we can use some quick things from TV presenters, and seeing and being on lots and lots and lots of Zoom calls, I've distilled a couple of key things that we can learn from them, because for all of us to have our remote presence a bit higher. What are those that we can learn? Now let's look at this one, and this is just a quick picture of how maybe some of the areas look like. And this is one of the key things that every TV presenter learns. And it's a very unnatural thing, but it's a very powerful thing. What does that mean, and what am I talking about? Well, very often we think, wow, video is great. Why is video great? Wow, I can look the person into the eyes, and that's great. I can look into the eyes. And that's what many people do. They see something on the screen, they see the video, that little box on the screen, and while they talk, they look into that little box. But if you do that, and you have experienced that already, if you do that, if you look at that little box and talk and engage, and yes, Robert, that's what I'm talking about. Actually, how it comes across on the other side is the same as what you're seeing right now. So the person looks somewhere, but definitely not into the eyes. What do great TV presenters know is if you want to look into the eyes of somebody during the presentation, you need to look into the camera. And that is something that can be enormously powerful, and that I would really recommend to do from time to time, at least, while you do your Zoom call or whatever it is that you use. I, for myself, need to remind myself time to time on, and I have little plaques, what you call look at the camera, that I attach close to the camera here as well, so that I'm really reminded to look into the camera. Does it always work? No, it doesn't always work, but it works most of the time, so that I can really connect with an audience as well. I've seen other strategies. Some people actually put little glasses on top of the laptop, basically there, so that they are so that they see that. Or other people actually put this in front of the camera, put a little take a paper, put a little hole in there, and says like, "Look at me," so to speak. And by that you really connect also with your organization, especially if you have to do a larger presentation to a larger group. The other things, and these are just quick tips, but I see it so much as I'm now also, of course, in a lot of Zoom calls. Very often we see this whole thing that it's very dark, somewhere in the background is some light, and of course it's a difficult situation for all of us, but there are some very quick fixes that we can do. Some very quick fixes that we can do. And what are some of these quick fixes? First of all, take a couple of books. A couple of big books, basically, and put your laptop on it so that you look roughly on eye level rather than down from before. Very simple solution. Can already change something. And then maybe invest into little lighting so that the light comes in front of you rather than into the back. And then maybe check your background and see what you want to project there and so on. With these 3 things already, you can actually make it very powerful. Here comes a question, actually. There was a question that was sent. Would you encourage leaders to force their staff to turn on their camera? A lot of people don't, and leaders seem reluctant to force it. Now, that depends on the situation, of course. I don't want to. I never give one size fits all questions. But what I do recommend is never to fall into an automatic yes, no setup. Never say like camera doesn't need to be always on, but it also shouldn't be always off. What I sometimes would encourage to do, for example, at the beginning of a session, is to say, look, hey guys, let's do a 5-minute round call, maybe then with video, and announce it beforehand and so on. Can also be a moment of personal connection and personal touch, so to speak. And then we can say like, okay, now we are full on, so to speak, and we've seen everybody, but now we can turn it off, also to save the bandwidth and so on. And these can be powerful strategies. I would not enforce everybody to do it, but I would put it into that team charter, like to little ground rules and so on for that. Number 8, for engaging virtual meetings, and probably those of you who have had fantastic virtual meetings have seen that, is to co-create. What is to co-create? Well, really to see that you actually start to engage with your audience. So for example, what I've been doing here for a couple of times, using polling. I just open a poll as well, and would love to ask from you, have you actually actively used polls before, for example, which can be done in almost every virtual setup. Let's briefly see what people have experienced in the past. Results are coming in. I'm looking at the results at the moment. All right, let's look at this. Okay, so 1/3 never, sometimes only passively participated, and sometimes of you, 30% have sometimes used that. My experience is polling is like the equivalent of a show of hands, so to speak, but can be very powerful, especially if we don't use a lot of video, especially if you talk to a larger group like we have here now, more than 80 people on the call. You can see a bit where you can't see everybody on video, which would maybe also crash the system for that side. It can be a very, very powerful thing to really see like, okay, what are people thinking on the other side? And that's why I'm quite a fan of actively using, also in smaller meetings, polls from time to time. Hey, let's look let's take a quick view of what everybody thinks, so that you don't have to do that roll call. And actually, that is a very powerful tool that I've even seen teams that used to work fully remote, when they came together, they stayed in this type of like polling mindset, because you can very quickly see where are people leaning, where people think is right, and so on. And it's a very powerful thing. In almost every tool you can do that, in WebEx, in Adobe Connect, in Skype, in Teams, and so on. All of these have the functionality. You might need to search for it, but you can do it almost everywhere. If you can't find it there, go to polleverywhere.com. I have no stake in that company. There's a couple of others like Slido, or like Slido, Pigeonhole. There's lots of these companies out there, but all of them enable you to do a quick link and to share and to get feedback from the others. It's also great if you present, basically, again, to get this feedback from others, to co-create. But also, you can co-create, and that's what I do very often, by drawing. And you've seen me draw here sometimes, but what you can do also, especially in smaller groups, up to 10 people I recommend this, you can open up the screen and let people annotate. Let them write something. Let them do, for example, a SWOT analysis where you go and check for strength, for example, here, and people start to write something on the screen. And what you can do is really do that, open up. People can start to draw, sometimes look a bit wild and so on, and people can contribute. But all of a sudden, what you're then doing is not only sharing stuff, not only discussing on the audio track, but you create something together. And when teams do that in their Connect, actually, virtual work starts to beat face-to-face work, because you can do things so fast. You can bring in people, also people who are maybe a bit reluctant to share, maybe because of English or other things as well, start to contribute as well. So it can be a great enabler to bring in also maybe more introverted individuals and so on into discussions. It looks a bit different on every platform. Let's connect later on. I have a couple of guides on how you can do that, whatever you use, be it Zoom, where you can do that perfectly, be it WebEx, Adobe Connect, whatever, GoToMeeting, whatever it is. It's possible in all of these places. Send me an email and so on later on if you want to have some more connection on this. But I can tell you one thing. Leaders who've started doing that with their global teams have really transformed their connection and interaction with each other. Yeah, so these were quick things that are done here in 1 minute ones where I looked at best practices, advantages, disadvantages from work from home, and people start to write, and you can do in 1 minute, you can do a pulse check and so on. It can be very, very powerful. Number 9, do virtual team building. Really taking this one step further. And many of you know team building like, oh, climbing or cooking together and so on. And people think like, oh, do we need to do those? Yeah, well, you can debate. But especially very often what doesn't happen anymore in the virtual environment, do we still need virtual tools, virtual things? Can we do virtual team building as well? And very often people say, well, why should we do that? Well, I think you can. And very quick things that you can build in, and they're very nice as well, that in team building I define as non-specific task focus areas. They can be very powerful. And what I recommend every virtual team to do is to do a quick team building exercise on the beginning of the virtual connect. Not long, very short and concise, but do things that help build skills that are outside of the day-to-day work. And especially now that we all have to work remotely, maybe you can even focus that on the remote work. Here's my felt estimate, especially, like, I was just sharing with you, like, oh, you can do annotation and so on in Zoom and other places. And many people have never used that. And they say like, oh, wow. Then they talk with their IT and they say, well, but it's all in the manual. And my assessment of manuals is very often, of tech manuals in companies, is like there are thousands of them. But my assessment of red tech manuals, so people who have really actively studied that, is a lot small on this. How can you still bring some of the things, because great remote work works perfectly if you know the tools as well. If you know the tools right. But how can you bring that in? Well, you do a little virtual team building exercise. And the easiest ones that I've done are things like 5-minute tips exercises. What is 5-minute tips? Well, you do your short connect, you have your virtual meeting, and in the beginning, everybody on a rotating basis shares for 5 minutes max, on one slide max, one tip that has made them, that they've learned over the last month and that have made them more effective as a virtual or remote leader. One thing, and be that just like, hey, I've learned, for example, that you can use in Adobe Connect, that you can use that little pointer here and you can use it away. Okay. Or, hey, what I've learned is that you can start to draw a little bit. Okay, great. Whatever it is, or maybe other things. But just 5 minutes, and you do that for a couple of times, 50 times, 100 times. You have this great wealth within your team that people start sharing ideas and sharing thoughts. And that brings technical savvy, and that we do need for great, powerful remote organizations. And that brings us to number 10. Have a drumbeat and a heartbeat. Have a drumbeat and a heartbeat. What is a drumbeat? Drumbeat goes a little bit back to the number of connections. Drumbeat means tick, 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 tick. From time to time, we move in. We have like a drumbeat you connect. You don't say like, oh yeah, let's meet next month. Probably lots of you who focus on a COVID area, on a COVID processes, actually don't meet a lot more than once a month. But actually set quick connects basically from time to time within your meeting so that people start this connection. But also not only have that drumbeat, but also the heartbeat, so to speak, to connect on the personal side of things. Especially now in times of crisis, and we'll talk in the second part of the series a lot more about this. How do we do best crisis leadership? How do we connect with people? How do we deal from a business standpoint with a crisis? But also from a personal standpoint as leaders. But what you can do here as well, not only have these 5-minute tips, but maybe check in as well often, have the heartbeat, so to speak, show empathy. Maybe at the beginning of the virtual team, what it works extremely well is like do a quick round tour of how people are doing. Sometimes also now embrace the fact that people are at home, and people, 1 year ago we had the BBC dad and so on, and now this is like, well, normal, that's and I have people walking in the background and so on. But share that, see that it's true human beings on the other side, not just virtual voices. And great virtual leaders and great remote leaders actually check that as well. The nicest thing, I've seen that once, and that was in pre-COVID. It's probably a bit more difficult to connect and to do that right now. But one of the greatest things I've done in a virtual team was a team that was spread over all continents. And during one meeting, basically, the person managing the agenda said, like, by the way, we have one more agenda item, and it's Robert's birthday. And then everybody opened their video cameras, so to speak. And what they organized then at the time, that's a bit more difficult to organize right now, that then also the office door opened. They brought in the present that the team had organized virtually before, and everybody started singing a little virtual choir, so to speak, and had this happy birthday Robert moment. But that doesn't happen spontaneously. That requires proactive leadership as well, proactive management, proactive engagement. But these are then the moments where across continents and across virtual connections, when great virtual teams start to connect and also start to bridge this divide that sometimes is seen as being fueled by the remote environment. So there we go. I've two more things that I wanted to share with you, but I wanted to end and do a quick check of time basically, but I wanted to end here and wanted to briefly go through what have we done. We have strategy number one, proactive interaction. Be proactive. That's also the number one and cornerstone. Reflect on your virtual image. Overshare and especially define your team's communication policy. Use the ladder. Whenever you feel like, move up the ladder if possible. Performance and exposure. See as a team how you can overcome that passive FaceTime bias. Over-visualize. Connect, but not only share a PowerPoint, but really create stuff together. Share your Excel document or your Word document. Already that creates engagement. Think of the TV presenter. Look into the camera, so to speak, rather than the other person, but also maybe invest in a little lighting. Maybe invest in an additional microphone to get away. Sometimes we see these big things that people have, maybe into a little podcast microphone and so on when they're available again. Co-create together. Start to find the button which says, allow participants to annotate. And when you do that, really a new thing opens up. Do virtual team buildings via 5-minute tips and have a drumbeat. Regular connects, but also the heartbeat. Really connecting also not only from the business side, because especially in times of crisis, it's so much more important to connect also from the human side. We are here, and while we record this here, it's beginning of May, where we see a couple of countries across the globe now thinking about their going back to office policies. And again, that really depends on where you are at the moment. But one of the fears that I do have is not fears, and really parking the business side of things. But one of the things that I see, at the beginning you said it's worked remarkably well as well. And whenever I talk now with leaders, and I say, no, it's actually working quite well. One of my hypotheses, I haven't studied yet the data, it's all moving very fast. But one of my hypotheses is it is working now quite well because everybody is working virtually. All the barriers of, well, but it's nicer to be in the office and so on have been removed because we've been forced to work virtually. If we move now back to the office, and especially in some countries, you see these parts moving back. So some people will be back in the office. We will see again that people see like, okay, but it's nicer to be with Fred in the meeting rooms and so on. And then the meeting room discussions are, and then one person calls in and says, hello, can you hear me well? And could you repeat that point? And maybe then, hopefully, we will maybe not, or maybe there's a watch out that we will lose that remote momentum. Try to keep it, but maybe also, and the easiest strategy would be like, for example, virtual connect, virtual meeting, level the playing field. Say, look, we keep on doing virtual meetings even if we are back in the office. That is an easy strategy that works remarkably well. But also think about that there is the absolute foundation is what is called the remote mindset. And across all the 10 strategies that I shared with you today, it was always the combination of tools and technology and ideas with the thinking of, I have to do and act proactively differently here as a leader. And the greatest teams I've seen that keep that constantly in mind, these are the ones that really also create this great virtual and remote environment. So with that, if you have any questions, any further thoughts and so on, let's keep that conversation, send them over to me and so on, and we have then a post-webcast conversation around this. But what I will encourage you to do as well, like let's connect in part 2 and 3 as well, where we look at then crisis leadership and then also business strategies for thinking ahead in the new world, and hope to see you there in the coming days and weeks. What we love to have is, of course, also your feedback, your thoughts, and so on for this one. Again, let's continue the conversation online, offline, and see you hopefully at the next webcast very soon. With that, stay safe, stay healthy, and let's continue very soon. Thank you.